The 70s were this weird sweet spot where studios were still drunk on new Hollywood freedom, handing blank checks to directors who probably shouldn't have had them. Audiences wanted feel-good blockbusters, but what they got instead were death-obsessed romances, pagan murder mysteries, and films where the hero's best option is marrying someone to kill them for money. Most of these bombed hard, then spent decades on video store shelves waiting for midnight crowds, twisted enough to finally get the joke. Harold and Maude starts with this rich kid staging fake suicides like other teenagers collect baseball cards, crashing funerals for kicks while his mother treats his depression like a scheduling conflict. Then this 75-year-old hurricane named Maude rolls into his life, stealing cars, rescuing trees, and treating every day like it might be her last. What starts as two death-obsessed weirdos bonding over funerals turns into this bizarrely tender romance where the kid finally meets someone who teaches him the difference between being alive and just not being dead yet. Here's where things got complicated though. Paramount questioned some of Hal Ashby's tonal choices during editing, and while later rumors claimed the studio seized control, Ashby quietly fought to keep the film's odd tenderness intact and mostly won. There was a love scene between Harold and Maude that got trimmed, not because of studio censorship, but because both Ashby and Paramount worried it might derail the tone they'd carefully built. Ruth Gordon embraced every moment of Maude's fearless joy, pouring herself into a character who refused to treat aging as something to apologize for. The soundtrack almost went a completely different direction too. Elton John was briefly considered for Harold before Cat Stevens officially joined as songwriter. Stevens wrapped the whole thing in this folk warmth that felt like a hug from your weird aunt who actually gets you, contributing songs like If You Want to Sing Out, that became Maude's entire philosophy and melody. The movie tanked at the box office, and critics were brutal, calling it morbid and disturbing, and questioning why anyone would make a romance about death, but it slowly became this ritual for generations of outsiders who finally saw their own weirdness reflected back without apology, proving that sometimes the film's audiences reject hardest are the ones they'll eventually need most. The Wicker Man drops this uptight Scottish cop named Sergeant Howie onto a remote island hunting a missing girl, finding instead a pagan community that celebrates fertility rituals and treats his Christian morality like an adorable inconvenience. Kids sing dirty songs in school, the innkeeper's daughter dances naked testing his resolve, and Lord Summerisle stays unnervingly amused like he knows a punchline the cop hasn't heard yet. When Howie infiltrates the May Day festival in costume to save the girl, he discovers she's safe, and the real sacrifice is him, lured as the perfect virgin offering, trapped inside a burning wicker effigy while villagers sing and watch him burn. Christopher Lee accepted the part for a fraction of his usual fee to escape the Dracula coffin. Hammer Studios built around him, betting on this weird low-budget film shot in miserable Scottish November weather, even though the story takes place in spring. When British Lion buried the movie with severe edits, Lee rang critics himself, trying to salvage attention for a film his own studio wanted to forget. The real nightmare came when director Robin Hardy tried reassembling his original cut, and 76 and EMI executives told him the canisters of film had been used as landfill during M3 motorway construction, even leading producer Peter Snell to a hole pointing at buried cans to prove it. Whether that motorway story is true or the cruelest brush-off in cinema history, nobody knows, but Hardy spent decades reconstructing versions from surviving prints. Britt Ekland's nude dance became iconic, but she hated the freezing shoot and discovered they used two body doubles for her backside while dubbing her voice with Scottish singer Annie Ross. The final burning scene caught real fear on Edward Woodward's face because he'd only seen drawings of the giant prop before they rushed to film it while dodging studio heads, and a goat in one compartment peed on the crew during takes. The film became a cult classic anyway, that missing footage and motorway legend feeding its mystique and turning it from a buried B picture released as a double feature with Don't Look Now into an obsession for fans forever, haunted by both pagan fire and the knowledge that something deeper got lost before anyone could fully see what Hardy intended. A New Leaf follows Henry Graham, this aging playboy who discovers his fortune's gone and faces a horrifying reality. He might actually have to work. Instead, he borrows money from his uncle and decides the dignified solution is marrying a rich woman fast, then quietly arranging her death so he can inherit everything. He targets Henrietta Lowell, this painfully shy botanist who spills tea, trips over furniture, and lets lawyers rob her blind while obsessing over a rare fern. Henry starts planning her accident during their honeymoon, but saving her from schemers awakens this unwelcome thing called a conscience. Elaine May directed her first film, determined to craft jet black comedy, about a man who genuinely follows through on killing, shooting a first cut that ran roughly 3 hours, and leaned darker with at least 2 deaths, though implied rather than shown. Paramount trimmed it to 102 minutes for a lighter tone, leaning into romantic uplift instead of May's sharper satire. May was so furious she sued over the loss of her final cut rights, and after legal wrangling, the studio released its version with her credit restored as part of a settlement. Walter Matthau reportedly bristled at how cold-blooded Henry was in May's original conception, wanting to shade him as more hapless and redeemable, and the studio cut aligned perfectly with his instincts. The film became a beloved, gentle black comedy over time, audiences laughing at Henry's bumbling redemption without knowing they were watching the sanitized version. But May carried the private knowledge that her darker vision, where Henry's charm never quite redeems his cruelty, was taken away and sold as something kinder than she ever intended. That lost cut lingering as a shadow film that showed what comedy could be if it stopped pulling its punches right before the murder actually happens. Black Christmas tracks sorority sisters, whose holiday turns into terror when obscene phone calls interrupt their festivities. And shy Claire gets suffocated upstairs, hidden in the attic in a rocking chair with a plastic bag over her face. Jess holds the group together while dealing with pregnancy and an unstable boyfriend as calls grow more deranged, until police trace them to inside the house on Christmas Eve. The film ends with Jess sedated and the camera drifting back toward the attic, suggesting the killer was never caught and might still be up there waiting, which terrified audiences in late '74 because slashers didn't do that cliffhanger dread yet. Olivia Hussey entered with Juliet's halo still hanging over her from Romeo and Juliet, wrestling with whether this Canadian horror would help or hurt her career. On set, Margot Kidder treated the shoot like a rowdy winter camp in cold Toronto, teasing Hussey's earnestness while bonding with Andrea Martin in the actual fraternity house the production rented near the University of Toronto. Hussey poured herself into Jess's anxiety, only to discover later she finds the film too frightening to watch, making her one of the few horror stars who helped create a classic she never properly experienced because it genuinely scares her too much. Lynn Griffin spent key scenes wrapped in that plastic bag that became the film's nightmare image, tearing a hole to stuff in her mouth and poking nose holes with a pencil so she could breathe while staying motionless as cameras adjusted around her frozen corpse. Bob Clark and actor Nick Mancuso invented the obscene phone calls during post-production by layering distorted voices and live improvisations that still sound unsettling today. The film tanked initially, released in Canada in December '74, then limping into United States theaters in '75, but it became the blueprint for every slasher that followed. John Carpenter literally studied this before making Halloween 4 years later. That plastic bag image and those layered voices creating scares that felt oddly intimate and leaving horror raw enough to spawn an entire genre, while most people still think Halloween invented the slasher and have no idea this Canadian nightmare came first. Phantom of the Paradise follows Winslow Leach, this earnest composer whose Faust cantata gets stolen by producer Swan, leading to him being framed, imprisoned, and mangled in a record press accident that destroys his face and voice. Escaping, he becomes a leather-clad curse as Swan warps his cantata into cheap trends like doo-wop and surf rock, only pausing when singer Phoenix expresses the emotion he wrote into the songs. Swan breaks his promise and replaces her with glam rocker Beef, pushing Winslow toward bloody revenge where contracts and bodies get shredded under stage lights. The production dressed a real industrial press for the disfigurement scene, cushioned with foam and manually controlled, but even with safety protocols, the machinery's strength startled the crew when it compressed faster than expected, a reminder of how close practical effects can come to actual danger. Paul Williams came aboard as a hired songwriter. This compact guy with gentle hits for the Carpenters and Three Dog Night, but Brian De Palma cast him as Swan instead. Williams ended up embodying the predatory side of an industry he knew intimately, while writing songs that could be destroyed in stages, earnest work warped into stadium anthems that strip all the meaning out. Jessica Harper stepped into her first major role as Phoenix, anchoring the carnival of grotesque with just her vulnerability and voice, a baptism into cult cinema that led straight to Suspiria 3 years later. The film bombed spectacularly. Audiences in '74 didn't know what to do with rock opera horror about the music industry, eating souls for profit, but it survived as that rare movie willing to commit fully to its gonzo premise. Swan's blood signed contracts feeling less like rock opera camp, and more like documentary footage every time another musician signs away their catalog for a quick payout and wonders where their art went and why they can't afford rent anymore. The Long Goodbye drops Philip Marlowe into '70s Los Angeles like he wandered in from another decade, still mumbling old-fashioned loyalty while the city moved on. Elliot Gould's Marlowe lives in a shabby beach apartment, feeding his cat and watching yoga neighbors glide through their lives with detached ease he'll never have. When friend Terry Lennox asks for a ride to the Mexican border, Marlowe agrees without hesitation until police arrive saying Lennox's wife is dead, and Marlowe is a suspect who refuses to give up his friend. After jail, he's told Lennox killed himself in Mexico, too neat for his instincts, and a wealthy woman hires him to investigate her husband Roger Wade's supposed suicide. By the time Elliot Gould came to this film, his reputation was badly bruised after being fired from A Glimpse of Tiger, with rumors hardening into a label: difficult, unstable, a genuine risk. United Artists required a psychiatric evaluation after Gould's prior conflicts, more PR precaution than genuine doubt, but still humiliating enough that it became public knowledge on set. Robert Altman pushed to keep him anyway, convinced Gould's offbeat energy suited a version of Marlowe, who no longer fit his world. Gould cleared the hurdle to craft a detective who mumbles and drifts verbally through scenes while hiding a stubborn core underneath, turning his real-life reputation as difficult into the performance of a lifetime. Sterling Hayden arrived playing washed-up novelist Roger Wade with his own history of turmoil, and Altman's overlapping dialogue gave Hayden room to roam, his real volatility bleeding into Wade's rants in a way that felt uncomfortably authentic. The film carries a single song composer John Williams wrote that Altman used in multiple forms, from lounge renditions to supermarket music to a Mexican mariachi performance to even a doorbell chime. Each variation seeps into Marlowe's world, like a melody. The city hums absent-mindedly while ignoring his troubles, the repeated tune gradually unsettling as it mirrors Marlowe's inability to speak the language of a Los Angeles that's moved on without him and no longer has room for his kind of loyalty. Sorcerer opens with 4 desperate men fleeing different disasters across the globe. Qasim plants a bomb in Jerusalem, Victor's Paris fraud ruins him, Jackie's church robbery kills his crew including a priest whose mafia brother hunts him, and Nilo executes a target before vanishing. All 4 wash up in Porvenir, this jungle village where an oil rig explosion demands nitroglycerin to cap the inferno, and the company offers big money to drive 2 trucks loaded with leaking crates through 200 miles of rotting bridges and mudslides where every jolt risks vaporizing them. Jackie takes the wheel of Sorcerer with Victor, while Qasim pairs with Nilo on Lazaro, and the jungle fights back with a swaying rope bridge in monsoon rains that became the film's most iconic nightmare. Roy Scheider arrived fresh off Jaws, but William Friedkin shoots across the Dominican Republic and Mexican jungles turned into a crucible that destroyed their friendship. Friedkin shipped real 1940s trucks into actual jungles and rebuilt the rope bridge multiple times after tropical storms destroyed it, pushing for authentic terror without helicopters or safety nets. Scheider spent months soaked wrestling the truck over real hazards, describing hallucinations from exhaustion and dehydration as he felt the jungle eating him alive while Friedkin screamed for more takes. Trucks flipped for real, one plunging down an embankment and genuinely injuring stuntmen, while Scheider's cab hydroplaned into dangerous positions that left him shaken. Bruno Kremer spoke little English and endured endless retakes where realistic prop acids irritated his hands while Friedkin screamed directions he barely understood. Scheider called it the worst experience of my life and vowed never to work with Friedkin again. Their friendship destroyed over a film almost nobody saw because it opened weeks after Star Wars and disappeared. But decades later, it got reclaimed as a masterpiece of existential despair that reminds you sometimes the films that break everyone involved end up mattering most to people looking for something that feels genuinely dangerous. Barry Lyndon traces Redmond Barry, this hot-headed Irish youth whose duel leaves him fleeing into the 7 Years' War, eventually charming his way into marrying the widowed Countess of Lyndon for her estates, while her resentful son, Lord Bullington's hate festers into open warfare. At peak splendor, Barry struts in silks commissioning portraits, but debts mount until Bullington thwarts his peerage bid, culminating in a duel where Barry's leg shatters and ends his swagger forever, leaving him crippled and fading into Irish obscurity. Ryan O'Neal landed the role writing love story fame, but Stanley Kubrick put him through 6 months of swordplay and 18th century manners that left him chafing and snapping at tutors. His duel scenes demanded precision, but O'Neal struggled for weeks, fueling his insecurity as co-star Marisa Berenson glowed effortlessly opposite him. Frustrations peaked during the 300-day Ireland shoot, where rain ruined costumes and O'Neal's ad-libs clashed with Kubrick's verbatim demands, leading to shouting matches where the director iced him out for days, literally refusing to speak to his lead actor as punishment. Marisa Berenson endured corsets that bruised ribs and 12-hour hair sessions, filming harpsichord with bleeding fingers in freezing manor houses. Here's the wild part. Kubrick rigged 18th century interiors with ultra-fast Zeiss lenses originally developed for NASA satellite use, forcing actors to freeze in drafty mansions for 20-minute exposures while maintaining perfect stillness under nothing but candlelight. The exhaustive 300-day shoot pushed crew to near revolt and left everyone drained. The film won technical Oscars for cinematography and costume design, but flopped commercially. Critics panning O'Neill's wooden lead and tanking his A-list dreams while cementing Kubrick's recluse legend as crew dispersed, whispering about perfectionism that bordered on abuse, birthing a visual masterpiece that film students worship and actors warn each other about, proving sometimes the most beautiful things come from the ugliest processes and leave everyone involved scarred by making something Kubrick considered worth any cost to human comfort or sanity.